this is Carla from Written Word Calligraphy, and today I'm going to showcase to you my new pointed nib sampler. I'm really excited about this piece because, as some of you probably know, I love using the Nikko G, but I know a lot of you guys also want to get to try different kinds of nibs. That's why we created this pointed nib sampler. It has different kinds of nibs, different varying heights and flexibility and pointedness, and I wanted to kind of write with each one so you guys can take a closer look at what it looks like. So one thing about nibs is that it does take a little bit of a prep work in order to get them to start. So I've got here my pen. This is our oblique calligraphy pen holder in Rose. And I've got here my Sumi ink in a medicine dropper, as some of you guys might have seen me talk about this. I love using this to put ink into my nib. And I've also got here a pair of pliers because sometimes some of the nibs, depending on how they are, you might need to adjust the flange a little bit for it to work. So let's get started first with the most flexible nib here. The first one is the Hunt 101. So the Hunt 101 is very sharp and super flexible. I would say this is not the most beginner friendly nib because it's super flexible, but if you don't write with a ton of pressure, this is a really good nib for that. So I'm going to see if it fits okay on my flange here. It's a little bit on the looser side, so I'm just going to tap this a little bit and adjust it. And what you want to do is try to point the nib so that it's closer to the midpoint of your pen. And what you want it to be is that it's snug enough so that when you're writing, it won't be able to it won't come off. So what we're going to do first is to prepare the nib for writing. I'm just going to dip the ink into this nib first like this, and then use a paper towel or a napkin to just rub the ink out. With the Hunt nibs, they're usually fairly easy to prepare. And now let's get started. Super flexible nib, by the way, this one. And this is how the Hunt 101 looks. Very flexible, very sharp. I'm not adding a lot of pressure at all. In fact, I'm kind of feathering it. So if you like really thick swells in your calligraphy style, this is going to be the nib for you. It's very sharp and flexible, but still sturdy enough. Like it doesn't, like the ink, as you can tell, like I haven't even dipped ink since. I was able to write this much already from one dip. So that means it holds ink very well. Yeah, look at those thick swells. Because it's a Hunt nib, I find Hunt nibs a little bit more scratchy than the Nikko G. But you can't get these swells as easily on a Nikko G. All right, so this is how the Hunt 101 looks in terms of flexibility. Okay, I'm gonna clean this one up. And this packaging, you know, this is not meant for you to put it back in here really, but I'm going to do that because this is my sample. But normally nibs, you would want to store them back in like an airtight container. So this is the Brause Rose, so I can see it's very loose here. So I can think I'm probably just going to tap this a little bit. Tap, tap, tap. Tighten this portion here. Okay, perfect. So you see, it now doesn't shift around as much. Oh, maybe a little bit more. That's the beauty about using a metal flange. It's nice and flexible. You can do whichever. And what you want to do, again, make sure that it's aligned to the midpoint as much as possible. Put in a little bit of ink because you can see it bubbles up right there. So you'd want to use paper towel. Some people use a potato. I like using just the ink as a solvent. Saliva also works. And as long as you just dry it completely, then you are okay. So also another flexible nib, this one. I'm just going to adjust it a little bit more by pulling this pair of pliers in a bit. There, that works. That's a lot more flex there. perfect. Okay, now we're gonna add some ink to it. So now you see I put the ink and it can go all the way to the very end. The good thing about this is that you can go to the very tip, and that helps it. Okay, now we've got the brows. Needs some feathering to get it started. Sometimes when you're starting it out, it needs a little bit of wiggle, so you can tell that how flexible this nib is. Definitely even more finicky, I would say, than the Hunt 101. Super duper flexible in terms of flexibility level. And it's a beautiful nib. It's got a cool rose detailing here. There's ink on the nib, but it's just harder to get it started sometimes. You have to add some ink towards the very end. Very tip of the nib. Yeah, this one, because I do write with a significant amount of pressure, this one is like super flexible. And not as sharp, as you can tell. Like the hairlines aren't as thin on this one. Super flexible. Again, it's definitely for somebody who likes to write with a lot of thick swells. Yeah. So that's two super flexible nibs. Next one is the Leonardt Principal. This one's also another favorite of mine in terms of flexibility. I like the nibs that have a lot of flex, but they're kind of sturdy. And this one's nice because it's on the sharper side, but it's smoother than the Hunt 101. Okay, it's nice and snug. And also it looks really cool. It's got this little trident shape here. Okay, again, need to prep this nib a little bit. Sometimes you might have to do it a couple of times if the ink doesn't flow through, but I think this is okay. Leonard, see, like, look at those lines. It's so much more flexible, and the hairlines are super fine. It's a very sharp nib, but more stable, more flexible than the Nikko G, but has that similar stability to it. Definitely really good for like copper plate. I personally really love this nib whenever I'm trying to do some flourishes, more than the Hunt 22, which is a lot of people's favorite. But if I wanted like super thin hairlines on my calligraphy style, this is the nib of choice. It's definitely one of my absolutely favorite nibs for my writing style. Running out of room here. Of course, right? Always happens when you need it the least. And then next one is the Brause Extra Fine 66. So this one is a really tiny nib. In fact, because it's so tiny and the amount of adjustments I need to make, I'm not going to use it on our pen. I'm using it on this pen. This has got like a more flexible ability to change nibs. This one's from John Neal Books, and it's a really cool nib that you can, pen holder that can hold all sorts of different nibs as well. So this one is one of my friend the Postman Knock, Lindsay's favorite nib. She uses it all the time. It's nice flex, but it's very bouncy. If you like a lot of playful letters, this is definitely a really fun nib to use. It's more, it's nice and stable as well. And I mean, come on, it's so tiny, but it holds ink really well. Definitely a favorite. See, I got to go this many letters before I had to dip, and it's so tiny, right? Like there's not a lot happening, not a huge reservoir of ink. Definitely you can still make like really thick swells on this, like this, see? I've made this end of the letter here a little bit more bouncy, but it's a beautiful, beautiful nib, and I know why. I understand why she loves it so much. And I think you guys are gonna love it as well. Definitely it needs a little bit of finessing because of how tiny it is, especially when you're using a nib like this. She actually has a video on how you can adjust it. A little bit more work, but since I'm flipping around with the different nibs in this little nib marathon here, I figured it would be easier to just put it in another pen that can hold that nib a little bit easier. This is the Hunt 22. Hunt 22 is also one of the copper plate favorites and Spencerian ones as well because it's so fine. It's probably got the thinnest hairlines, even thinner than the Hunt, the Leonard. It's more scratchy as well, but you can see, look at how fine it is. I'm having to really feather my writing here. And personally for myself, I find this nib works better after a few more times that you've used it. But this is the reason why, personally for myself, I love using the Leonard Principal if I wanted to have that super fine hairlines. But yeah, like definitely more scratchy, like I feel myself snagging a little bit more. And that's okay, that's part of the process. Like when you have, and you have to adjust to so many different nibs, it's kind of hard, but because it depends really a lot on your style of writing. And this one's also fairly flexible, like you can get a good flex in the nib, but it's definitely on the thinner, finer side. And the next two nibs actually I'm going to be using are even more stiff, because I like my stiff nibs, like being able to control it. But if you like the super fine hairlines, this is the way to go. Look at how thin those lines are in comparison to, say, like the Brause Rose, you know, it's like super, super duper thin. And then, of course, the Tachikawa. The Tachikawa is similar in construction and style as the Hunt 22. As the Nikko G, but it's a little bit more flexible. So a lot of my students, recently after we did a Cali Camp Live, started talking about how this nib is so fun, and I decided I needed to go try it. And I actually ended up really liking it. And it's really cool that there's another option. If you want a little bit more flexibility, but have that stiffness of the Tachikawa. Slightly thinner hairlines as well. You can kind of recognize my writing style a little bit with this one, right? Now that I've written it again, it feels a little bit stiffer actually. But who knows, maybe my Nikko G was old, so it was just a little bit older. But I love it. Yeah, medium stiff nib, flexible, but not too finicky. It's great for beginners. And then the last one, the Gillette, is definitely on the stiff side, which is really cool if you write with a lot of pressure. It's a great nib for that. Yeah. Then lastly, let's try the Gillette. By the way, you guys, you've been seeing me clean my nib with a paper towel. That's great for like doing a short clean. Typically, you would want to wash it with water and soap and then putting it in an airtight container. Okay, guys? Okay. Preparing the nib. And what's really cool about this nib, first of all, it's blue. And the tip is not as fine. So I personally love that because that just means I could write on more more textured surfaces. Oh, I love it. I love this nib. And it's also really reasonably priced nib as well. You can see how thick the hairlines here than this one. But great flexibility, great control. I personally prefer these types of nibs. I find I have to work less in order to write these nibs. Right with these nibs. All right, so that's how these nibs look once you've actually written them all. Really cool to be able to experience that and get to test it out for you guys, how that all feels, because I know unless you've actually tried a nib, you won't know how good it feels or how it actually works. So it's nice to be able to finally do that, and that way you guys can see and get a preview. Of course, once you actually try it, it'll be a different story, but I hope that you guys can do something like this and tell me, you know, your review of each nib, which one you like the best. I'm really curious about what you'd like the best, and I'll see you guys in another video.